The diplomatic summit hall buzzed with the conversations of a dozen alien species, their varied forms creating a living tapestry of colors and shapes beneath the crystal dome of Nexus Station. Ambassador Kethavar of the Hegemony adjusted his ceremonial robes, the fabric shimmering with bioluminescent threads that displayed his family's ancient lineage. Around him, other delegates wore their finest garments, flowing silk-like materials that seemed to move with their own life, jeweled accessories that caught and refracted the station's artificial sunlight, and ornate headdresses that spoke of wealth and sophistication. The peace negotiations had been months in the making. The Terran Coalition, newest members of the Galactic Council, had requested mediation in their border dispute with the aggressive Zephyrian Empire. Most species viewed humanity as naive newcomers, barely a century into space travel while others had explored the stars for millennia. Their technology was crude by galactic standards, their ships functional but lacking the elegant designs that marked truly advanced civilizations. When the doors to the main hall slid open with a soft hiss, conversations gradually died as all eyes turned toward the human delegation's entrance. The other ambassadors expected to see humans in their typical formal wear, the simple black and white garments they'd worn to previous diplomatic functions, perhaps with some ceremonial additions to show respect for the occasion. Instead, a lone figure stepped through the doorway that made several delegates step backward in surprise. She stood just under 6 feet tall, her frame lean but clearly muscled beneath form-fitting armor that bore the distinctive matte black finish of Terran military gear. The armor itself was scarred and pitted, showing clear signs of energy weapon impacts, kinetic strikes, and what appeared to be acid burns along the left shoulder plate. Her helmet was tucked under one arm, revealing short-cropped auburn hair and a face marked by a jagged scar that ran from her left temple down to her jaw. Behind her walked 2 more humans in similar battle-worn gear, their weapons clearly visible despite this being a diplomatic station, where arms were supposedly forbidden. The female in the lead carried herself with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to violence, her pale blue eyes scanning the room with the practiced assessment of a predator evaluating potential threats. "Is this some kind of insult?" whispered Ambassador Veltar of the Crystalline Consortium, his translucent features flickering with indignation. "Do they think this is a battlefield rather than a peace negotiation?" The snickering started from the Hegemony delegation first. Kethavar allowed himself a small smile of amusement. "Typical humans," he murmured to his aide. "No understanding of proper protocol. They send a common soldier to handle matters of diplomacy. How wonderfully primitive." The laughter spread through the assembled delegates like ripples across water. The Zephyrians, despite being the opposing party in these negotiations, seemed equally amused by humanity's apparent diplomatic blunder. Their war chief, Thakmor, let out a series of chittering sounds that served as laughter among his insectoid species. "Perhaps they confused the location," suggested the ethereal delegate, her voice carrying the musical quality of her people. "Maybe they thought they were attending a military parade instead of a peace summit." The human delegation seemed unfazed by the reaction their entrance had provoked. The scarred woman, who had to be their representative based on the way the others deferred to her, walked calmly to the designated Terran position at the circular negotiation table. She set her helmet down with a deliberate thunk that echoed in the suddenly quieter hall, the sound somehow ominous despite its simplicity. "Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings of various classifications," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber without need for amplification. Her accent was distinctly Terran, with the crisp consonants of someone from the inner colonies. "I am General Sarah Martinez, representing the Terran Coalition in these proceedings." "General?" Kethavar couldn't hide his surprise. They'd sent a military officer to handle diplomacy? The breach of protocol was even worse than he'd initially thought. Martinez continued as if she hadn't heard the murmur of confusion. "I understand there's been some concern about the appropriateness of my attire for these negotiations." She gestured to her battle-scarred armor with casual indifference. "I assure you this is exactly what I intended to wear." The Zephyrian war chief leaned forward, his compound eyes glittering with what might have been amusement or contempt. "Human, do you mistake this gathering for a battle? We are here to discuss terms of peace, not to wage war." "Peace," Martinez repeated as if tasting the word. "Yes, that's what we're here to discuss. The terms under which the Zephyrian Empire will cease its unprovoked attacks on Terran colony worlds and withdraw from the disputed sectors." Thakmor's mandibles clicked in irritation. Unprovoked. Your species encroaches on territory that has belonged to the Empire for centuries. We merely defend what is ours. Interesting perspective, Martinez replied, her tone conversational despite the tension building in the room. I suppose that's one way to describe the systematic bombardment of civilian settlements and the enslavement of non-combatant populations. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats while others exchanged meaningful glances. The Zephyrians' treatment of conquered populations was well known throughout the galaxy, but it was rarely discussed so directly in diplomatic settings. Ambassador Kethavar decided to intervene before the situation deteriorated further. General Martinez, while we appreciate the Terran coalition's directness, perhaps we should begin with more traditional diplomatic protocols. There are established procedures for these negotiations. Martinez turned those pale blue eyes on him, and Kethavar felt an unexpected chill. There was something in her gaze that spoke of experiences far beyond anything he'd encountered in his centuries of diplomatic service. Protocols, she said quietly. Yes, I'm familiar with those. I've seen how well galactic protocols work when civilians are being slaughtered and entire worlds are being strip-mined into lifeless husks. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the station's atmospheric recycling system seemed to quiet, as if the machinery itself was holding its breath. Martinez reached for something attached to her belt, and half the delegates tensed before realizing she was simply retrieving a small data pad. Shall we begin? She asked, her voice carrying a note of deadly politeness that made even the most experienced diplomats in the room suddenly uncertain about how these negotiations might proceed. The first hour of negotiations proceeded with painful formality. Ambassador Kethavar attempted to guide the discussion through traditional diplomatic channels, presenting prepared statements and following protocols that had governed interstellar relations for thousands of years. The Zephyrians responded with their own formal declarations, claiming ancestral rights to the disputed territories while carefully avoiding direct admission of their more brutal tactics. General Martinez sat quietly through most of these exchanges, occasionally making notes on her datapad, but otherwise seeming almost bored by the proceedings. Her silence began to unnerve the other delegates more than any argument might have. There was something predatory about her stillness, like a hunter waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The Empire's position is clear, War Chief Thakmor declared, his chittering voice filled with authority. These sectors have been within our sphere of influence for over 3 centuries. The arrival of human colonists does not supersede our historical claims. Historical claims, Martinez repeated, finally speaking up. She touched her datapad, and the room's central holographic display activated, showing a 3-dimensional map of the disputed region. Let's talk about history. The display zoomed in on one particular system showing a blue-green world orbiting a yellow star. Kepler 442b. The Zephyrians call it Hive World Tertiary. Humans call it New Eden. Population before the conflict, 2.3 million colonists, mostly agricultural workers and their families. She touched the pad again, and the peaceful world transformed into a hellscape of orbital bombardment, the surface scarred by massive craters and the oceans boiling away into steam. Population after the Zephyrian Reclamation Zero. Uncomfortable murmurs rippled through the assembled delegates. The ethereal representative's luminous form flickered with distress, while several others shifted in their seats. The Empire was within its rights to reclaim territory illegally occupied by alien settlers, Thakmor stated, though his voice lacked some of its earlier confidence. Martinez stood up slowly, her armor creaking softly. I was there, she said simply. Ground Forces commander for the evacuation effort. We managed to get about 40,000 people off-world before your fleet arrived. She touched her scarred cheek absently. This is from a Zephyrian plasma cutter. Received it while carrying a 6-year-old girl to the last transport ship. Her name was Emma Chen. She wanted to bring her stuffed rabbit. The room fell into complete silence. Even Thakmor's compound eyes seemed to dim slightly. The rabbit was pink, Martinez continued conversationally, with one ear chewed off by the family dog. Emma cried when I told her we had to leave it behind because there wasn't enough room on the transport. Weight restrictions, you understand. Every gram mattered when we were trying to save lives. She activated the display again, showing another world. Proxima Centauri C. Human name Haven. Zephyrian designation, Resource Extraction Site 7. Population before 800,000. Population after, approximately 50,000 survivors in forced labor camps. Ambassador Veltar of the Crystalline Consortium spoke up nervously. General, while these losses are regrettable, warfare has always involved civilian casualties. The important thing now is to find a peaceful resolution. Martinez turned her attention to him, and Veltar immediately regretted speaking. Regrettable, she echoed. Yes, that's what we call genocide now, regrettable. She moved away from the table, her boots echoing on the polished floor as she walked to one of the large viewing ports that showed the stars beyond Nexus Station. I've spent the last 3 years fighting this war. Not from behind a desk, not from the safety of a command ship, but on the ground with the Marines and the colonists who refused to abandon their homes. When she turned back to face the assembly, her expression had changed. The diplomatic mask had fallen away, replaced by something far more dangerous. I've pulled children from burning buildings while Zephyrian bombardment turned entire cities into glass. I've held dying colonists while they begged me to save their families. I've walked through the ashes of worlds that once hosted millions of human lives. Kethvar tried to regain control of the situation. General Martinez, while we all sympathize with the Terran losses, we must focus on the future rather than dwelling on past grievances. The purpose of these negotiations is to prevent further bloodshed. Prevent further bloodshed, Martinez repeated. She laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. That's what they told me when they assigned me to this diplomatic mission. Go make peace, General. Use your words instead of your weapons. She returned to her seat, but her posture had changed. Where before she'd seemed almost relaxed, now she sat with the coiled tension of someone ready for violence. The problem is, some people only understand one language, and I've become very fluent in that language over the past 3 years. War Chief Thakmore's mandibles clicked aggressively. Is that a threat, human? Do you forget that you stand on neutral territory, surrounded by the representatives of a dozen civilizations? Your primitive species cannot hope to stand against the combined might of the galactic community. Martinez smiled for the first time since entering the chamber, and somehow that smile was more frightening than any threat could have been. Primitive, she mused. That's what everyone keeps saying about humans. We're new to space, our technology is crude, our understanding of galactic politics is naive. She stood again, this time moving with the fluid grace of a trained killer. Tell me, War Chief, what do you know about human military doctrine? Thakmore's compound eyes glittered with contempt. Your armies are small and poorly equipped. Your ships are functional but lack sophistication. Your tactics are straightforward to the point of simplicity. All true, Martinez agreed cheerfully. We are everything you say we are, primitive, crude, simple. Her smile widened. But you know what else humans are? She reached into a pouch on her armor and withdrew something that made several delegates gasp in shock. It was a Zephyrian combat mandible, obviously taken from a warrior, polished to a high gleam and clearly kept as a trophy. We're really good at killing things that try to kill us. The sight of the Zephyrian mandible sent shockwaves through the diplomatic assembly. Several delegates recoiled in their seats while others stared in fascination at the polished trophy. War Chief Thakmore's entire body went rigid, his own mandibles clicking in rapid, agitated patterns that served as his species' equivalent of stuttering. This belonged to Hive Captain Jektar, Martinez said conversationally, turning the mandible over in her hands as if examining a piece of interesting sculpture. He led the assault on the civilian evacuation center at New Johannesburg. Very thorough in his work. Made sure to target the children's areas first. She set the trophy on the negotiation table with a soft click that seemed to echo in the absolute silence of the chamber. Jektar was convinced that humans were soft, weak. He believed that terrorizing civilians would break our will to fight. Ambassador Kethvar found his voice, though it came out as little more than a whisper. General, this is highly irregular. Trophy taking is considered a barbaric practice by civilized species. Martinez's pale blue eyes fixed on him with laser intensity. Barbaric, she repeated. Interesting choice of words from someone whose species has spent the last 2 millennia conquering primitive worlds through economic manipulation and political coercion. Kethvar's bioluminescent robes flickered with indignation, but before he could respond, Martinez continued. Jektar learned something important in his final moments, something that the galactic community seems to have trouble grasping about humanity. She activated her datapad again, and the holographic display showed detailed military engagement reports. Battle after battle, all showing the same pattern. Initial Zephyrian advantages followed by increasingly desperate human counterattacks, and finally complete tactical reversals. "We don't fight like you do," Martinez explained, her voice taking on the tone of a professor delivering a lecture. "Your species wage war according to established protocols, rules of engagement, concepts of proportional response. You fight to achieve political objectives while minimizing casualties and economic disruption." The display zoomed in on one particular engagement, the Battle of Kepler Station. "Humans fight to win, period. We don't care about proportional response when our children are being murdered. We don't worry about economic disruption when our worlds are being enslaved. And we absolutely don't follow established protocols when our survival is at stake." War Chief Thakmor finally found his voice. "You speak of victory, yet your forces have been in retreat for months. Our fleets control 6 systems that were once human colonies." Martinez smiled that cold smile again. "Yes, you do. And how many Zephyrian warriors have you lost taking those 6 systems?" The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Thakmor's silence was answer enough, but Martinez wasn't finished. "The hegemony intelligence estimates place Zephyrian military losses at approximately 60% of your total combat strength," she continued, reading from her datapad. "That's just in the past 18 months. Your breeding cycles can't replace experienced warriors that quickly, can they?" She looked directly at Thakmor, who seemed to shrink slightly under her gaze. "You're winning territory, War Chief, but you're losing the war. And you know it." The ethereal delegate, her musical voice trembling slightly, interjected. "Surely there must be some middle ground. Some compromise that both sides can accept. The galaxy has always found peaceful solutions to territorial disputes." "Peaceful solutions?" Martinez mused. "Like the peaceful solution your people implemented on Vega Prime? The one where you convinced the indigenous population to sign mining contracts that essentially gave you their entire planet in exchange for worthless trinkets?" The ethereal's luminous form flickered with shock and embarrassment. "That was... The native species agreed to those terms willingly. After you used your psychic abilities to make them more agreeable to negotiation," Martinez countered. "Very peaceful. Very civilized." She stood and began walking around the circular table, her boots clicking against the floor in a rhythm that seemed almost hypnotic. "This is what I find fascinating about galactic civilization. You've all found ways to take what you want while maintaining the fiction that you're enlightened beings. Economic manipulation, psychological conditioning, political coercion, cultural indoctrination. All very sophisticated methods of conquest." She stopped behind the Crystalline Consortium's delegation. "Your people perfect this art form, don't you, Ambassador Veltar? You loan developing civilizations money to build infrastructure, then gradually increase interest rates until entire worlds become indentured to your financial networks." Veltar's translucent features shifted in what might have been discomfort. "The consortium provides valuable services to emerging civilizations. Our financial instruments have lifted countless species out of poverty into economic slavery," Martinez corrected. "But it's all very legal, very proper, very civilized." She returned to her seat, settling back into the chair with an air of casual menace. "Humans haven't figured out how to conquer people while making them grateful for the privilege. We're too primitive for that level of sophistication." The room waited in tense silence for her to continue. "When someone threatens us, we fight them. When they kill our people, we kill them back. When they enslave our colonies, we burn their worlds to ash and scatter the ashes in space." Her voice never rose above conversational level, but somehow it filled the chamber with a presence that made veteran diplomats struggle to breathe. "It's simple. It's direct. It's honest." She picked up the Zephyrian mandible again, studying its polished surface. "And apparently it's terrifyingly effective." Ambassador Kethvar tried once more to restore diplomatic decorum. "General Martinez, regardless of past grievances, we must find a path forward that allows all parties to coexist peacefully. Surely the Terran Coalition doesn't want to be seen as a rogue element in galactic society." Martinez laughed, and this time there was genuine amusement in the sound. "Rogue element? Ambassador, I think you've misunderstood something fundamental about this situation." She activated her datapad one final time, and the holographic display showed star charts of the local galactic arm. Red indicators marked Terran colony worlds, while other colors showed the territories of various alien civilizations. "You seem to think that humanity wants to join your galactic community," That we're here begging for acceptance and trying to prove we deserve a seat at the big kids' table. The star chart zoomed out, showing the true scope of human expansion over the past century. Colony after colony, research station after research station, mining operation after mining operation. The red indicators formed a growing web of human presence that stretched across dozens of star systems. The truth is, we don't need your approval. We don't need your trade networks or your financial systems or your political alliances. Martinez's voice carried absolute conviction. We need you to stop attacking our people. That's it. That's the only thing we want from any of you. She leaned forward, her scarred face radiating an intensity that made even the most experienced diplomats want to look away. And if you won't stop voluntarily, we'll make you stop. Because that's what humans do when diplomacy fails. The silence that followed Martinez's declaration stretched for long minutes. The assembled delegates seemed frozen, as if her words had cast some kind of spell over the chamber. Finally, Ambassador Kethvar cleared his throat and attempted to regain control of the situation. General Martinez, I think perhaps there's been a misunderstanding about the purpose of these negotiations. He began carefully. The Terran Coalition requested mediation through the Galactic Council. Surely that indicates a desire to resolve this conflict through diplomatic means. Martinez tilted her head slightly, studying him with those pale blue eyes. Did we? Request mediation, I mean. She consulted her datapad, scrolling through what appeared to be official communications. According to my records, what we actually did was inform the Galactic Council that we would be holding negotiations with the Zephyrian Empire at this location on this date. We invited anyone who wanted to attend to do so, but we never requested mediation. War Chief Thakmor's mandibles clicked in confusion. Then why are we here? What is the purpose of this gathering? Simple, Martinez replied. We're here to dictate terms of surrender. The words hit the assembly like a physical blow. Several delegates gasped audibly while others began urgent whispered conversations with their aides. The ethereal representative's luminous form flickered so rapidly it became difficult to look at directly. Surrender? Thakmor's voice rose to a near shriek. The Empire does not surrender to primitive species. Our fleets control 6 of your worlds. Our armies are dying, Martinez interrupted calmly. Let me paint you a picture, War Chief. Your forces currently occupy 6 human colonies. Congratulations. You've also lost approximately 400 warships, 800,000 ground troops, and your entire 3rd fleet. She activated the holographic display again, showing detailed casualty reports that made several delegates pale. More importantly, you've learned that holding human territory is very different from taking it. The display zoomed in on one of the occupied worlds, showing what appeared to be constant combat throughout the colony. Kepler 442b, for example. You've held it for 8 months now. How's that working out for you? Thakmor remained silent, but his compound eyes betrayed his discomfort. The problem with conquering humans, Martinez continued, is that we don't seem to understand when we're supposed to stay conquered. Those colonists you didn't manage to kill? They went underground. Literally in some cases. They're still fighting. She touched her datapad, and the display showed underground tunnel networks that honeycombed the planet's surface. Mining equipment makes excellent tunneling tools. Agricultural chemicals can be converted into explosives with minimal effort. And civilian transport ships, well, they make very effective suicide bombs when loaded with the right materials. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. Ambassador Veltar spoke up, his translucent features displaying obvious distress. General, are you describing terrorist tactics? Surely the Terran Coalition doesn't condone such methods. Martinez turned her attention to him, and Veltar immediately wished he hadn't spoken. Terrorist tactics, she repeated thoughtfully. That's what you call it when primitives fight back against civilized conquest. She stood and walked to the viewing port again, gazing out at the stars. Tell me, Ambassador, what would you call it when a superior military force bombards civilian population centers? When they target schools and hospitals? When they enslave non-combatants and use them for forced labor? Veltar remained silent. Because from where I stand, that sounds like terrorism on a planetary scale. Martinez's reflection in the transparent aluminum was distorted, making her scars appear even more prominent. But when civilized species do it, we call it pacification or resource management or cultural integration. She turned back to face the assembly. Humans use different terminology. We call it things that need to be stopped. War Chief Thakmor attempted to regain some authority. Your resistance efforts are meaningless in the face of superior technology. The Empire's orbital platforms can sterilize entire continents if necessary. Yes, they can, Martinez agreed. And if you do that, every human in the galaxy will know that the Zephyrian Empire is willing to commit genocide to hold territory. Do you really want to find out what humans are willing to do when we decide that a particular species needs to be extinct? The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Even the station's atmospheric systems seemed quiet, as if the machinery itself was holding its breath. You wouldn't dare, Thakmor said. But his voice lacked conviction. Martinez smiled, and this time the expression was genuinely terrifying. War Chief, 3 years ago I was a colonial defense coordinator. My job was to make sure mining equipment got delivered on time and that agricultural shipments met quota requirements. I had never killed anything larger than a spider. She walked back to the table, her movements predatory and fluid. Today, I've personally ended the lives of over 300 Zephyrian warriors. Not from orbit, not with long-range weapons, but up close where I could see their faces when they died. She picked up the polished mandible again, holding it like a weapon. Do you know what changed me from a bureaucrat into a killer, War Chief? Watching Zephyrian soldiers use human children for target practice. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Thakmor seemed to shrink in his chair. So when you ask if humans would dare to escalate this conflict to the point of species extinction, my answer is simple: try us. Martinez's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried clearly through the chamber. See what happens when you push a species that has nothing left to lose. Ambassador Kethvar tried desperately to restore some semblance of diplomatic protocol. Surely there must be some middle ground, some compromise that allows both species to coexist. Martinez set the mandible down and consulted her datapad. Actually, there is. The Terran Coalition is prepared to offer very reasonable terms. She touched the pad, and the holographic display showed a new star chart. Complete Zephyrian withdrawal from all human-settled systems, reparations for destroyed colonies and civilian casualties, and the delivery of all Zephyrian war criminals to human custody for trial. War Chief Thakmor's entire body went rigid. Those terms are impossible. The Empire will never agree to such humiliation. Then you'll continue to lose fleets and warriors until you change your mind, Martinez replied with casual indifference. Or until you run out of fleets and warriors. Either way works for us. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of each delegate in turn. This is what I came here to tell you. Humanity is not asking for your permission to exist. We're not begging for acceptance into your galactic community. We're informing you of the new reality. Her smile widened, showing teeth that seemed predatory in the chamber's artificial light. We're here whether you like it or not, and we're not going anywhere. The negotiations took an unexpected turn when Ambassador Kethvar requested a formal recess. The delegates filed out in small groups, their conversations hushed and urgent. Martinez remained seated at the table, calmly reviewing data on her pad, while her 2 escorts positioned themselves near the exits. Within an hour, the chamber filled again, but this time the atmosphere was different. The earlier amusement and condescension had been replaced by something that looked remarkably like fear. Several delegates had clearly been in communication with their home governments, and the responses they'd received had shaken them. War Chief Thakmor was the first to speak when the session resumed. The Empire has consulted with the High Command regarding your proposal. His voice had lost much of its earlier arrogance. We are prepared to discuss modified terms. Martinez didn't look up from her datapad. No, the simple word hung in the air like a weapon. Thakmor's compound eyes flickered with confusion. You haven't heard our counterproposal. Don't need to, Martinez replied, finally raising her eyes to meet his. The terms I presented aren't negotiable. They're an ultimatum. Ambassador Veltar leaned forward urgently. General Martinez, surely you understand that diplomacy requires compromise from all parties. Even if your military position is strong, completely inflexible demands serve no one's interests. Martinez touched her datapad, and the holographic display activated to show real-time military positions throughout the disputed sectors. The assembled delegates stared in shock at what they saw. The Zephyrian forces, which had been holding 6 human worlds just hours earlier, were now surrounded. Massive human fleets had appeared as if from nowhere, completely encircling every Zephyrian position. The technological disparity that everyone had assumed favored the aliens was nowhere to be seen. Instead, the human ships appeared larger, more numerous, and far more advanced than anything previously reported. "Where did those fleets come from?" whispered the ethereal delegate, her musical voice carrying a note of pure terror. "We built them," Martinez said simply. "Turns out that when you're fighting for your species' survival, you can accomplish remarkable things in very short time frames." She stood and walked to the display, pointing to various human formations. 3 years of warfare taught us some valuable lessons. First lesson: galactic technology isn't actually superior to human engineering. It's just different. The display zoomed in on one of the human vessels, showing technical specifications that made several delegates gasp. "Your ships prioritize efficiency and elegance. Very impressive from an aesthetic standpoint. Our ships prioritize killing things and being very difficult to kill in return." War Chief Thakmor studied the display with growing horror. "This is impossible. Our intelligence reports indicated that human military capabilities were limited. Your industrial capacity couldn't support fleets of this size." "Your intelligence was based on what we wanted you to see," Martinez replied. "Humans learned the value of deception about the same time we learned to make fire. We've had a lot of practice." She touched the pad again, and the display showed human industrial facilities that clearly predated the conflict with the Zephyrians: massive shipyards, weapons manufacturing centers, and what appeared to be entirely automated production facilities. "We started building these fleets the day after first contact with galactic civilization," Martinez explained. "Call it paranoia, call it prudent planning, but humans have a saying: hope for the best, prepare for the worst." Ambassador Kethvar's bioluminescent robes flickered with agitation. "You've been preparing for war for over a century? Against species you'd never even met?" "We've been preparing for war for our entire evolutionary history," Martinez corrected. "That's what humans do. We're a predator species from a death world, where everything that wasn't trying to kill us was trying to eat us, poison us, or crush us." She began walking around the table again, her boots clicking against the floor in that hypnotic rhythm. "Earth taught us that the universe is hostile and that survival requires constant vigilance. Then we met galactic civilization and discovered that the universe is even more hostile than we'd imagined." The display changed to show historical records of various alien civilizations, their rise and fall documented in clinical detail. 47 species have gone extinct in the past 1,000 years. Not from natural disasters or resource depletion, but from conquest, economic manipulation, or cultural integration. All perfectly legal under galactic law. She stopped behind the crystalline consortium delegation. "Your people alone have presided over the extinction of 6 civilizations through debt restructuring programs." Veltar's translucent features showed obvious distress. Those species were unable to adapt to modern economic realities. The consortium provided them with opportunities for growth that they unfortunately couldn't utilize effectively. "You bankrupted them and sold their worlds to higher bidders," Martinez said flatly. "But you did it through legal channels, so it's considered civilized." She returned to her seat, settling back with that casual menace that had become her trademark during these negotiations. Humans looked at galactic civilization and realized that we had 2 choices: become predators or become prey. The holographic display returned to showing the current military situation. Zephyrian forces completely surrounded, human fleets in position to destroy them at will. "We chose to be predators," Martinez said quietly, "and we're very, very good at it." War Chief Thakmor's voice was barely above a whisper. "What do you want from us?" "I already told you. Complete withdrawal from human space, reparations for damages, surrender of war criminals." Martinez's tone was conversational, as if discussing the weather. "You have 48 hours to begin the evacuation." "And if we refuse?" Martinez smiled that cold smile again. "Then every Zephyrian military unit in human space dies. All of them. No survivors, no prisoners, no mercy." The chamber fell into absolute silence. Even the station's atmospheric recycling system seemed to pause. "After that," Martinez continued, "we'll move on to Zephyrian space. Not to conquer it, you understand? We don't want your worlds. We just want to make sure you never threaten human colonies again." She leaned forward slightly, her pale blue eyes reflecting the light from the holographic display. "Do you know what happens to a species when its military is completely destroyed? When its industrial infrastructure is reduced to ash? When its government collapses and its population is scattered across the galaxy as refugees?" Thakmor couldn't speak, but his entire body was trembling. "They become extinct," Martinez said softly. "Not because anyone sets out to commit genocide, but because they can't maintain genetic diversity or cultural continuity. They just fade away over a few generations." She sat back in her chair, her expression becoming almost sympathetic. "The Terran Coalition doesn't want to be responsible for the extinction of the Zephyrian species. That's why we're offering terms instead of simply proceeding with total warfare." The silence stretched for long minutes before Ambassador Kethavar found his voice. "General Martinez, what you're describing is essentially the same choice you accuse other species of offering. Submit or die." "Yes," Martinez agreed cheerfully. "The difference is that we're being honest about it. No legal fiction, no diplomatic double talk, no pretense of mutual benefit. We're telling you exactly what will happen if you choose to continue this war." She gestured to the holographic display showing the surrounded Zephyrian forces. "The choice is yours, War Chief. 48 hours. The next 36 hours passed in a blur of frantic communications between the various delegations and their home governments. War Chief Thakmor had retreated to secure quarters, presumably in communication with the Zephyrian High Command. The other delegates huddled in small groups, their conversations filled with words like unprecedented and catastrophic shift in galactic balance. Martinez spent the time reviewing tactical reports and coordinating with fleet commanders throughout human space. The casual efficiency with which she managed a military operation spanning dozens of star systems only reinforced the growing fear among the other delegates. This wasn't a desperate species making empty threats. This was a carefully planned and flawlessly executed demonstration of power. Ambassador Kethavar approached her during one of the brief breaks in communications. "General Martinez, I hope you'll forgive my directness, but I must ask, what happens after the Zephyrian surrender? What are humanity's long-term intentions regarding galactic civilization?" Martinez looked up from her datapad, studying the hegemony ambassador with those unsettling, pale blue eyes. "That's an interesting question, Ambassador. What do you think should happen?" "I would hope that humanity might consider joining the established galactic community as a productive member. Your technological capabilities could benefit all species if channeled through proper diplomatic frameworks." Martinez laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Proper diplomatic frameworks? You mean the same frameworks that allowed the Zephyrians to attack human colonies with impunity for 3 years? The same frameworks that have presided over the extinction of 47 species in the past millennium?" Kethavar's bioluminescent robes flickered with discomfort. "The galactic community has learned from past mistakes. Reforms have been implemented, safeguards established." "Reforms," Martinez repeated. "Tell me, Ambassador, what reforms would have prevented the bombardment of New Eden? What safeguards would have protected the civilians in the forced labor camps on Haven?" The ambassador had no answer. Martinez returned her attention to her datapad. "The truth is, Ambassador, humanity isn't interested in joining your galactic community. We're interested in making sure it never threatens us again." Before Kethavar could respond, an urgent chime indicated an incoming priority communication. War Chief Thakmor emerged from his quarters, his compound eyes dim with defeat. The other delegates quickly assembled as he approached the central table. "The High Command has reached a decision," Thakmor announced, his voice hollow. "The Zephyrian Empire accepts the terms proposed by the Terran Coalition." A collective sigh seemed to escape from the assembled delegates, though whether it was relief or something else was unclear. Martinez nodded once. "Wise choice. Evacuation of human space will begin immediately. Reparations will be calculated based on damage assessments already completed by Terran survey teams. War criminals will be transferred to human custody within the next 72 hours. She touched her datapad, and the holographic display showed updated fleet positions. The human ships that had surrounded Zephyrian forces were now providing escort formations, clearly designed to ensure compliance with the surrender terms. "There's one additional condition," Martinez added casually. The Zephyrian Empire will publicly announce the terms of this surrender to the galactic community. Full disclosure of the conditions and the circumstances that led to acceptance. Thakmor's mandibles clicked in distress. That would be humiliating for our species. Yes, it would, Martinez agreed. Consider it a teaching moment for the rest of the galaxy. Ambassador Veltar spoke up nervously. General Martinez, with the Zephyrian situation resolved, perhaps we could discuss humanity's future relationship with other galactic civilizations. Surely there's room for mutually beneficial cooperation. Martinez stood and walked to the viewing port, gazing out at the stars beyond Nexus Station. Cooperation, she mused. What kind of cooperation did you have in mind, Ambassador? Trade relationships, technological exchange, cultural cooperation, the standard frameworks that govern interaction between civilized species. And if humanity isn't interested in those frameworks? Veltar's translucent features showed confusion. I'm not sure I understand. All spacefaring species participate in galactic commerce and diplomacy. It's how civilized societies function. Martinez turned back to face the assembly, and her expression was almost pitying. Ambassador, you're still thinking in terms of the old paradigm. The one where humanity was a primitive newcomer seeking acceptance into an established order. She activated her data pad one final time, and the holographic display showed something that made every delegate in the chamber gasp in shock. It was a star chart of the local galactic arm, but the scale was enormous. Human presence wasn't limited to the few dozen systems they'd been aware of. Red indicators showing human colonies, stations, and fleets stretched across hundreds of star systems. This is the new paradigm, Martinez said quietly. Humanity doesn't need galactic civilization. We've built our own. The scope of human expansion was staggering. Hidden colonies, secret research facilities, manufacturing centers, and military installations formed a vast network that dwarfed the combined territories of most alien civilizations. How long? Whispered the ethereal delegate, her musical voice barely audible. We've been expanding since first contact, Martinez replied, quietly, carefully. While you were all assuming we were struggling to maintain a few dozen primitive colonies, we were building an interstellar civilization specifically designed to be independent of galactic systems. She walked back to the table, her boots clicking against the floor in that hypnotic rhythm that had become so familiar. We learned from studying your histories. Every species that became dependent on galactic trade networks, financial systems, or political alliances eventually lost their independence. Some through economic manipulation, others through political coercion, a few through outright conquest. The display zoomed in on specific human installations, showing industrial capabilities that rivaled anything in galactic space. Humans decided we wouldn't make that mistake. We built our own networks, our own systems, our own civilization. Ambassador Kethvar's voice was barely above a whisper. What do you want from us? Nothing, Martinez said simply. That's what I've been trying to tell you. Humanity doesn't want anything from galactic civilization except to be left alone. She gestured to the holographic display showing the vast scope of human presence. We have our own trade routes, our own research networks, our own manufacturing capabilities. We don't need your permission to exist, and we don't need your approval to expand. The silence that followed was deafening. The assembled delegates stared at the display, trying to comprehend the implications of what they were seeing. This changes everything, Kethvar said finally. Yes, it does, Martinez agreed. The question is, what are you going to do about it? The final session of the negotiations took place 48 hours later. The chamber felt different now, charged with intention that made even veteran diplomats uncomfortable. The delegates who had initially snickered at Martinez's battle-scarred armor now watched her with the careful attention usually reserved for dangerous predators. War Chief. Thakmor entered the chamber flanked by two Zephyrian subordinates, his compound eyes dim with defeat. The evacuation of human space had begun exactly as Martinez had demanded, with Zephyrian forces withdrawing under the watchful presence of human fleets. The efficiency of the operation had stunned galactic observers who were accustomed to protracted negotiations over every detail of surrender terms. The first transport of war criminals will arrive at the designated human facility within 6 hours, Thakmor announced, his voice hollow. Reparations calculations have been accepted without modification. The public announcement of surrender terms has been broadcast throughout Zephyrian space and transmitted to all galactic news networks. Martinez nodded once in acknowledgement. The Terran Coalition appreciates the Empire's cooperation. This concludes the immediate business regarding the territorial dispute. She stood preparing to leave, but Ambassador Kethavar cleared his throat urgently. General Martinez, if I may, there are broader implications to consider. Your revelations about human capabilities have created significant concerns throughout the galactic community. Martinez paused, her hand resting on her helmet. Concerns? The scope of human expansion, the independence of your infrastructure, the capabilities of your military forces. These developments represent a fundamental shift in galactic balance of power. Kethavar's bioluminescent robes flickered with nervous energy. Perhaps it would be beneficial to establish formal protocols for interaction between humanity and other civilizations. Protocols, Martinez repeated, as if tasting the word. What kind of protocols did you have in mind, Ambassador? The Crystalline Consortium's delegate, Veltar, leaned forward eagerly. Non-aggression pacts, trade agreements, territorial recognition treaties. The standard diplomatic instruments that maintain peace between spacefaring civilizations. Martinez walked to the viewing port and gazed out at the stars, her reflection distorted by the transparent aluminum. And what happens to civilizations that don't sign your standard diplomatic instruments? The question hung in the air like a challenge. The delegates exchanged uncomfortable glances, but no one answered. Let me rephrase that, Martinez continued, still looking out at the stars. What happened to the 47 species that have gone extinct in the past millennium? Did they refuse to sign the right treaties? Fail to maintain proper diplomatic relationships? Ambassador Kethavar tried to regain control of the conversation. General, those situations were complex. Multiple factors contributed to those unfortunate outcomes. Martinez turned back to face the assembly, and her smile was sharper than any blade. Multiple factors. Like economic manipulation by the Crystalline Consortium, political coercion by the hegemony, military conquest by species like the Zephyrians. She walked back to the table, her movements fluid and predatory. Or maybe they just made the mistake of trusting galactic civilization to honor its agreements. The ethereal delegate's musical voice carried a note of desperation. Surely humanity doesn't want to be seen as a hostile force in galactic politics. There must be common ground we can establish. Hostile? Martinez laughed, but there was no warmth in the sound. We're not hostile. We're honest. She activated her data pad one final time, and the holographic display showed detailed files on each of the delegates' home civilizations. Military capabilities, economic vulnerabilities, political weaknesses, technological limitations. The level of intelligence gathering was staggering and deeply unsettling. We know exactly what each of your species is capable of, Martinez said conversationally. We know your strengths, your weaknesses, your standard operating procedures for dealing with primitive civilizations. The display zoomed in on specific installations and fleet movements, showing that human intelligence networks had penetrated every major galactic civilization. We've been watching you for over a century, learning your methods, understanding your motivations. War Chief Thakmor's voice was barely a whisper. What do you plan to do with this information? Nothing, as long as you leave us alone, Martinez replied. But if any galactic civilization decides that humanity needs to be integrated into your existing power structures, well, she gestured to the intelligence files. We'll be ready. She began gathering her equipment, clearly preparing to leave. The Terran Coalition has no interest in conquering galactic space or imposing human authority over other species. We simply want to exist without interference. Ambassador Veltar spoke up nervously, and hypothetically, if someone were to take action against human interests, what would be the consequences? Martinez paused in her preparations and looked directly at him. What happened to the Zephyrian Empire will look like a gentle diplomatic intervention compared to what happens to the next species that threatens human colonies. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the station's atmospheric systems seemed to hold their breath. Let me be perfectly clear, Martinez continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Humanity is not seeking conflict with galactic civilization, but we will not tolerate threats to our people, our worlds, or our way of life. She picked up the polished Zephyrian mandible from the table, studying it for a moment before placing it in a pouch on her armor. This is a reminder of what happens when someone mistakes human restraint for weakness. The assembled delegates watched in fascination and horror as she completed her preparations. This scarred, battle-hardened woman had single-handedly redefined humanity's relationship with the galaxy, and they were only now beginning to understand the implications. "General Martinez," Ambassador Kethvar said finally, "what message should we convey to our respective governments about humanity's position?" Martinez sealed her helmet under her arm and walked toward the exit, her escorts falling into formation behind her. At the doorway, she paused and looked back at the assembled delegates. "Tell them the truth," she said simply. "Humanity is here. We're not going anywhere, and we're done asking for permission." She stepped through the doorway, then stopped and turned back one final time. "Oh, an ambassador? The next time someone snickers at battle gear in a diplomatic setting, remind them that some people wear their credentials on the outside." The doors slid shut behind her with a soft hiss, leaving the delegates alone with their thoughts and the sobering realization that the galaxy had just changed forever. The age of galactic civilization's unchallenged dominance was over. The age of humanity had begun. In the silence that followed, Ambassador Kethvar looked around at his fellow delegates and spoke the words that would define interstellar relations for generations to come. "I think we need to revise our definition of primitive.